As Alana, The Rock's oldest daughter, walks home from dance class, she accidentally runs into a racist and biased police officer who wrongly suspects her of being up to no good. Things quickly go from bad to worse when the officer drags her towards his police car, causing her to trip and hurt her knees. Little does the officer know that he has picked the wrong person to mess with, because he is about to meet Alana's father, the formidable and powerful Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The calm is broken only by the gentle rhythm of Alana's footsteps as she walks down the street. Looking beautiful in her dance leotard and slippers, her backpack slung over her shoulder, Alana's humming fills the quiet evening air, creating the melody of dancing. Along with her youthful vigor, she is blissfully unaware of the sinister presence lurking in the shadows of the nearby bushes. Just as the last rays of sunlight fall below the horizon, the suburban serenity is broken by the blast of approaching sirens. Alana, startled from her musical reverie, turns to see a police cruiser screeching to a stop by the curb. Its flashing blue and red lights bathe the street in an eerie glow. An officer steps out, his uniform pressed to perfection, and the badge on his chest shining like a beacon in the dark. "Hey you," he barks, cutting through the stillness of the night. "Where do you think you're going?" Alana's heart stops beating, and the calmness she had just moments ago disappears as she tries to figure out who this officer is. Greeting her, Alana says, "Sir, I'm on my way home," but she also swallows her rising fear. Officer Grayson, with a smug grin that looks like a predator sizing up its prey, walks towards Alana, closing the gap between them like a noose around Alana's throat as he does so. Officer Grayson leans in and asks, "This isn't your neighborhood, is it?" In a voice that sounds like an accusation. "Are you sure you're not up to something? A young girl like you walking alone at this hour?" Alana sways uncomfortably under the weight of Grayson's scrutiny, her mind racing to come up with an explanation that will make him feel better. "Alana, I'm just on my way home from dance class," Alana, she says. Alana stutters. "I live just a few blocks away," and her eyes dart from Grayson's face to the cruiser behind him. She's desperately trying to get away from this unwanted encounter, but Grayson's expression stays the same. His face is a mask of self-assured skepticism, and his voice cuts through the growing tension like a scalpel. "Sure you do," he taunts. "Let me see some ID." Alana's hands trembling as she searches her pockets for her wallet, and she quickly pulls out her student ID. Closing around it with a possessive intensity, his smirk, an ever-present fixture on his face, takes on a smugness that borders on cruelty. His eyes scan the ID, seemingly savoring the power he wields in this moment. Grayson lets out a deers of snort, tossing the ID back to Alana with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "How, Alana Johnson?" He sneers his tone, mocking, "You're not one of those famous Johnson. Are you the rich and famous don't? Usually slum it around here." His words cut deep, each syllable a dagger, aimed at Alana's sense of self-worth, but she knows better than to engage with his cruelty, her face a mask of stoic resolve. Alana, her voice steeled by a newfound resolve, squares her shoulders and meets Grayson's gaze head-on. "Actually, I am," she says, defiance and pride surging through her words, "my dad." But before she can finish, Grayson raises a hand, cutting her off with a wave of dismissive arrogance. "Grayson, yeah. Alana, with her heart pounding in her chest, tries to move away from the officer's looming presence. But before she can take more than a single step, Grayson's fingers close around her arm like a vice, yanking her back towards him with a vicious yank. "Where do you think you're going? You're not leaving until I say so," he yells angrily. Alana's voice, no longer muffled by fear, comes out with a boom that shocks even herself. "Hey, let go of me," she yells, struggling to break free from Grayson's grip. "Hey, you little brat. You think you can talk to me like that? You're in a lot of trouble." When Grayson pushes Alana towards a squad car, she falls and her body hits the cold metal with a painful thud. Alana's feet can't keep up with her, and she crumples to the ground, her knees scraping across the asphalt with a raw, visceral agony. The sound of her fall echoes down the street, a haunting percussion in this nighttime symphony of violence. As Alana's body cries out in protest, her mind rallies against the mounting terror. her fingers trembling, but she stays focused as she fumbles for her phone, the screen glowing like a beacon of hope in the darkness. With a sing, she dials a familiar number, her father's, and each ring seems to take an eternity. Like a prayer, Alana's voice breaks as she talks about a vulnerability that goes beyond her current situation, carries a desperate urgency that pierces the air like a scream in the middle of the night. "Dad, I need you," she sobs, her words tumbling out of her mouth in a torrent of emotion. "It's Officer Grayson. He grabbed me. I'm scared." The line is silent except for the shallow rasp of Alana's breath. The scene shifts to a large office, its walls covered with accolades and awards. At the head of a sleek mahogany table sits The Rock, his posture one of focused intensity as he meets with a group of executives. But in an instant, the seriousness of the meeting disappears like a mirage as The Rock's phone rings. He looks at the caller ID, and his expression changes from that of a stern business mogul to that of a protective father. "Alana," he murmurs, his voice holding a raw protectiveness that Brooks doesn't argue. The Rock's voice is still measured and calm, but there is a stormy undercurrent that hints at his anger simmering. "Alana." He repeats every word as if it were a fervent plea. "What's wrong? Are you okay? What's going on even in this moment of uncertainty?" The Rock's demeanor commands attention, his presence an immovable anchor in the shifting tides of Alana's distress. Alana's words, choked with tears, cut through the phone like a scalpel, carving deep into The Rock's heart. "A cop," she cries, the anguish in her voice. "He stopped me and grabbed me and pushed me to the ground." The Rock's expression hardens. His jaw clenches like a vis. Heat and insistently coils through him like a snake, its poisonous fangs ready to strike The Rock. "Where are you?" "I'm coming to get you." The Rock's truck stops just feet away from the fight. The door swings open, letting out a natural force that shakes the very ground. The Rock comes out of the darkness like a wrathful god. His chiseled body is lit up by the streetlights, and his eyes are filled with righteous rage. Grayson's cockiness, which had seemed impenetrable moments before, crumbles under the weight of The Rock's presence. He takes a step back, his expression changing from smugness to stunned disbelief. Officer Grayson, whose earlier confidence was now tinged with doubt, attempts a weak jibe at The Rock's arrival, calling it a rescue mission to save Alana from the big bad cop. But his humor fails miserably as he tries to distract from the tension in the air. The Rock, who has only Alana's safety in mind, walks towards her with all his might, as if he were driven by a father's primal instinct to protect his child kneeling before her. He holds her face in his huge hands and asks her, "Alana, are you okay? Did he hurt you?" His voice is soft and rumbles, and his face is a mix of defiance and lingering fear. "I'm fine, Dad," she says, her voice steadier now with a hint of her usual strength coming back. "He grabbed me for no reason. I told him I was on my way home, but he wouldn't listen." The Rock turns his attention to Grayson, whose body makes him look like a giant standing next to an ant. As he faces Grayson, his face hardens into a rage that looks like a volcano about to erupt. And piercing bore into Grayson's soul, dissecting the man before him with a singular focus. Grayson, his bravado faltering, takes a step back, suddenly aware of the precariousness of the situation. He opens his mouth to speak, but The Rock cuts him off, his voice low and dangerous. The Rock's question hangs in the air like a guillotine, its blade poised to fall with deadly precision. "You touch my daughter." He repeats, his voice dropping an octave, a harbinger of the wrath to come. Grayson, mistaking the Rock's silence for acquiescence, straightens his shoulders, a smirk pulling at the corner of his lips. She was being uncooperative, he says, his voice dripping with a smug satisfaction. "Had to teach her some respect, girls these days." He chuckles, his tone mocking and condescending, but the laughter dies on his lips as The Rock advances, his footsteps echoing like thunderclaps in the night. The Rock's proximity transforms Grayson's confidence into fear, his arrogance crumbling like sand castles under a rising tide. With each step The Rock takes, Grayson takes another back, as if trying to outrun the wrath of an approaching tsunami. "Respect." The Rock repeats, his voice low and filled with menace. "You think shoving a teenage girl to the ground is teaching respect?" His eyes burning with the fury of a father's scorned drill. into Grayson's sole gray in his hand, closing around the wooden baton at his belt. Tries to reassert his authority back off Big Guy. He warns a tremble in his voice, betraying his fear on the law here, but The Rock, his own hands clenching the fist the size of bowling balls, laughs a low, terrifying sound that seems to shake the very earth beneath their feet. The law, The Rock snorts. If you were a real cop, you'd be upholding the law and not hiding behind it. The Rock's words, uttered with the icy certainty of a man about to mete out justice, are a death nail for Grayson's hopes of escaping this confrontation. And Skade, not tonight, you're not The Rock, declares his voice like a judge passing sentence. Grayson, his bravado, now a distant memory, backpedals faster, trying to maintain distance between him and the towering behemoth stalking towards him. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Grayson swings his baton with the ferocity of a cornered animal, hoping to strike a crippling blow, but The Rock, his reflexes honed by years of training and discipline, effortlessly catches the wooden weapon, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the night, with a casual flick of his wrist. He snaps the baton in two, the shattered pieces falling to the pavement like shards of Grayson's authority. The Rock's words, had heavy with the promise of retribution, seemed to bend the very air around him. You just made the worst mistake of your life, he growls, his voice like a rumble of impending doom. Grayson, his eyes darting around in panic, looks for an escape route, but he's back out into a corner, his options dwindling with every passing second. Grayson whispering, "Please don't do this." In a blur of motion, The Rock unleashes a devastating display of physical prowess that leaves Grayson reeling, his movements honed by years in the squared circle are a symphony of controlled power, a ruthless efficiency that belies his rage. He spins Grayson around, disarming him with a swift twist of his wrist, and locks him into a rear naked choke. Hold his massive arms vices of strength with a calmness that borders on serenity. The Rock pulls Grayin close, his lips grazing the terrified officer's ear. Grayson, his fear now a palpable force, thrashes wildly in The Rock's grip, his limbs flailing like a drowning man, grasping for a lifeline. "Please don't hurt me," he cries out, his voice trembling with desperation in a futile attempt to escape. He lunges towards the cruiser's eyes fixed on the safe haven of the driver's seat, but The Rock is agile as he is powerful, intercepts Grayson's path, his body a wall of muscle that Grayson crashes into like a wave against rocks. To The Rock, his voice an icy whisper of menace, glares down at the defeated Grayson, his body trembling in a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "You're not going anywhere," he says, his words dripping with contempt. "We're going to make sure everyone knows what kind of cop you really are. We're going to make sure you never hurt another innocent person again." With a sharp shove, he pushes Grayson down to his knees, his face pressed into the cold, hard ground. And then he reaches for his phone, dialing a number with cold precision. As the night sky paints the scene in shades of inky darkness, the flashing lights of police cruisers converge on the street, their sirens an eerie chorus against the backdrop of suburban silence. Amidst the growing confusion, Captain Morales emerges from the sea of uniforms, his expression a blend of worry and determination. "Morales, what the hell's going on here?" He barks, his gaze fixing on The Rock, the form of Grayson by his feet. "Someone tell me what's happening." The Rock stands his ground, his eyes locked on Morales, his posture unflinching. The Rock, his voice calm but unwavering, lays out the sequence of events, painting a damning portrait of GR's behavior. "Your officer assaulted my daughter for no reason," he says, his voice reverberating with a righteousness that commands attention. He grabbed her, shoved her to the ground. She was just walking home. As he speaks, the witnesses, their eyes wide with fear and anger, nod in agreement, their testimonies sealing Grayson's fate. Morales, his face a mask of consternation, stares down at Grayson, a tangle of shame and fury roiling within him. Morales' voice cuts through the night air, its sharpness rivaled only by the rage simmering just below the surface. "Hand over your badge and gun," he orders, each word a gunshot in its finality. "You're done. You have no business being in a uniform if you think this kind of behavior is acceptable. You're a disgrace to the badge." Grayson, defeated and cowering on the ground, surrenders his badge and weapon, his fingers fumbling with the task, his face contorted in a mixture of shock and defeat. Grayson, his voice faltering, begins to stammer out a defense, his words tangled in excuses and half-truths. I thought she was," he pleads, his desperation palpable in the air. But Morales' patience worn thin shuts him down with a thunderous crack of his voice. Morales, "Enough. I don't want to hear it. You assaulted a teenage girl. If it wasn't for The Rock here, God knows what you might have done back in the warmth and safety of their home. The Rock sits beside Alana in his massive frame, almost comically dwarfed by the delicate care he takes as he tends to her scraped knee, his hands large and callous from years of hard work move with surprising gentleness as he dabbed ABS away the blood with a cotton swab. The Rock soothing, that's an angel, just a few more seconds and we'll get you cleaned up good. As new Alana, her face a picture of gratefulness, turns towards her father, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Thanks for coming, Dad, she says, her voice trembling with the raw emotion she's barely holding in check. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't showed up. When you did. The Rock's expression softens, his eyes glistening with unshed tears of his own. The Rock with tenderness, I'll always be there for you, Alana, you're my girl, I love you. As the camera pans out, the father and daughter embrace their bodies, creating a single silhouette against the warm ambient glow of their home. The love they share unbreakable and fierce pulses through the scene, its strength radiating outward like a wave of light. In the background, a voiceover deep and resonant speaks the words that sum up the story's message. In a world where injustice rears its ugly head, sometimes it takes a hero or a father to stand up and make things right. The Rock in this case was both.